So the pressures of a corporate career is way lesser than the pressures of being a Baptist minister. So how does that happen? So are you sitting inside a conference room within the church, in the church premises, and there's who are you answerable to? Who is it that is laying down these rules that, okay, this is your target for this month or this year? So who is doing all these rule setting?
Yeah, in the Baptist church, typically there are finance committees, stewardship committees that are responsible for the budget and expenses of a church. And, a minister works closely with that committee to draft the budget for the coming year, to ask people to pledge, to make, this is what I will give next year. And then based upon the pledges, you look at a budget. And in some cases, if the pledges don't rise to the level of expenses to operate the church, you have to think about cutting programs or cutting positions, staff positions. Those are very real decisions. And those are decisions businesses make every day. If you're spending more than you're bringing in, it doesn't matter whether you're a church or a business, you have to make cuts. You have to make hard decisions. And I'm not, in this case, I'm not making a judgment. You look at it very clinically, very objectively. This is what people are pledging, and this is our current expense status, and there's a gap. How are we going to bridge that gap? So in my experience, the pressures of bringing new members in, and that's probably as greater than the financial picture, because the presumption is if you're bringing new members in, they're going to give their money. So you have existing members presumably giving, new members coming in, bringing their money with them, and those kind of fed each other. But those pressures were far greater than anything I've experienced. And I've worked at some very high-profile companies like Dell, Cisco Systems, and currently Amazon. And I will tell you, the pressures of positions in those companies pale in comparison to the pressures I faced as a minister. And I will also argue that companies where I've worked are much fairer in treating their employees than some churches are in treating their staff members. There are some church members that think they know how and what a minister should be doing, and there's constant critiquing and carping. In my world, in the corporate world, you have a very clear assignment, you have very clear responsibilities, and you have annual reviews. And those reviews, even if you've had a bad year, if an employee misses quota, there's still that overall appraisal for the most part is positive. It's critical, but yet it's not all critical. And the thing that I found in my ministry is that church members wanted to focus more on what wasn't working or your shortcomings than on, say, what you did well. We use an evaluation system at Amazon. It's called Forte, and you seek input from your extended peer group, and they are asked to write not about your shortcomings. They're asked to write about what we would call your superpowers. And that's not an Amazonian word. This model is being used throughout corporate America in evaluating employees, because those who study human behavior have found that in those kind of annual reviews, even the most outstanding employee, if he or she gets even a slice of negative feedback, that's what they focus on. And they want you to focus on your strengths, because no one has all the gifts. No one gets all the gifts. And I found in the ministry that it was the opposite, that church members wanted to focus on the things that weren't working and your shortcomings, thinking that they knew how to run a business in a church. And if they came inside the gates of where I work today, they would be aghast at how we evaluate employees annually.
Wow. So this is an entire corporate setup. I mean, it's the church is a corporate setup.
Well, functionally, practically, pragmatically, yes, you have to deal with money coming in, revenue, money going out, expenses. And hopefully you're getting more money in than you're sending out. But and I've been out of this for a long time, Esther, as you know. But you probably know that mainline church denominational attendance is on the decline. The fastest growing religious group in recent polls are the nones, Nones. That includes atheists, agnostics, but it also includes those that don't identify with any particular, religious organization. But the decline of mainline denominations has been a phenomenon that was occurring even when I was a minister, and churches haven't figured out what to do about that. And in many of those cases, that pressure gets placed upon the head of the leader. And that's a very difficult and tough. It makes that role incredibly difficult and tough.
But I don't agree that churches do not know, haven't figured out what to do with that. They have definitely figured out, and they are implementing what they just figured out, which is transporting the, importing the language, exporting the religion to India or countries like India.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting, Esther, because there are some businesses. I'll give you a great example. Look at the hospitality industry and take a company like Hilton or Marriott. I have a cousin who is an executive with Hilton. They're still growing in America, but their new markets are China and India and places that have not been served. And so I don't know what's going on in India with respect to the Protestant church, but I do know in America that attendance has been declining and precipitously for the last 25 years. And I'm not seeing correction. But again, I've been, away from it. But again, I can't speak to what's going on in India.
Right.
But I could say this, when, in my second congregation, it really would not have mattered what was happening in India because they didn't care. They cared about what was happening in their congregation and in their building. And I don't mean to sound callous. They at one level, certainly I would think, or at least some members cared about what was happening in the world. But at the end of the day, if attendance was declining and they weren't bringing money in and they had bills to pay and weren't able to pay them, they would be so paralyzed and crippled by their own problems. And I saw this, that the rest of the world, pardon the expression, could go to hell. And again, not everyone felt like that, and maybe only a few, but it becomes very myopic when you're in a local church, because let's face it, Esther, all organizations, whether they be religious or secular, strive to maintain their ongoing existence. They fear death, and they will do anything to forestall or preempt that. But like in the church, corporations also die. When I was at Cisco, John Chambers, who's one of the greatest CEOs of the modern era, in internal meetings, he would always show what he called the graveyard slide. And it would be a timeline from, say, going back to 1980 to the current. And you would see in the graveyard former companies that were behemoths in their day, tech giants that no longer existed. Jeff Bezos, a couple of years ago, caught heat from Wall Street when he said, there will be a day when Amazon will not be a company. History supports that. There are no companies today that have a shelf life longer than 100 years. He was being honest. And he's true. There will be a day when either some company or something will disrupt Amazon, like Amazon has disrupted other companies in retail and technology. And that phenomenon is, the churches are not excluded from that phenomenon. You can see church doors that are closing, every month, every year. And again, I'm not making a judgment. It's an observation of both church organizations, church families, and corporate America.
So with all that is happening, and with there being no difference between the workings of a corporation and the workings of a church, where is God in all of this? When God is supposed to be protecting the church, the institution of church, right? The organization of church, unlike the corporations, which will meet an eventual and imminent death. But God is supposed to be the owner of church. Where is he in all of this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. and I don't have an answer for that. And I don't know that church members do, but I think it's one they should ask because, if there is a God and if church is one of the vehicles, by which God is manifest to the world, he's not doing a good job. Now, let's face it. There are some churches that are thriving. The mega churches with mega pastors, but mainline denominational churches have been declining, and it does beg the question: where is God? And you can make all kinds of speculation. And as you know, Esther, the premise of my book is I don't know that there is a God. I don't think we can know. And if we don't know and can't know, the very next things we say are conjecture. They're just utterly, necessarily, inescapably conjecture. So where is God in the decline of mainline denominations? I don't know. It's a good question. But clearly he's failing, or the church is failing, or both. I would tend to say I don't think he's anywhere to be seen because I'm not sure that there is a God anywhere to be seen. And so the demise of churches then would be no different than the demise of a business. A bigger, better church comes along, attracts families and kids with its programs, leaving a smaller, declining congregation in its wake, only to close its doors. That's called business disruption. Walmart did it with retail. Amazon has done it to Walmart and others, and that happens in church in church life. Bigger churches pop up, and they're the new shiny object, and everyone wants to go to that. And then that leaves
even God, including God.
Including God. Yeah, God's left behind. So, or God moved. God went to
God moved. That's what I'm saying. God's not left behind. He moved to the bigger church along with the congregation.
Yeah, where the minister has a jet and is making $1 million a year with a megawatt smile. Yeah, but if that's God, no thanks. I'm not interested. I'll pick another God.
True. So you said you left ministry, you left Christianity when you were 35.
Yeah.
What took you so long to come out to the public and come out with a book?
Well, what took time with the decision is I struggled with it. I gave it my best shot, Esther. I had a mentor at Princeton and a mentor at Duke, and they were adamant that I not leave ministry. They said the church needed a voice like mine, and they compared my voice to that of a theologian named Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich was one of the more prominent theologians of the last century, and Tillich refuted the notion that God was a being among other beings. And he reframed the notion of God from being a being to being the ground of being itself. And Tillich talked about faith in terms of our ultimate concerns. And really, Tillich reduced religion to the existential and used existential language. And that's essentially what I did probably the last 2 years of my ministry, because I could no longer talk about a personal God, a supreme being. And oh, by the way, that word supreme is incredibly funny to me. I mean, supreme denotes of the highest order and perfection. And the being that we call supreme has really not done a great job. Supreme is not the right adjective. Maybe an okay God, maybe an inadequate, but I would reserve the word supreme for someone else or some other phenomenon. It certainly doesn't match the God of the Bible who kills children in a flood, or the God that people worship today who allows Auschwitz in COVID. So I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I gave it my best shot. And after deliberating, seeing psychologists only to be told I wasn't crazy, because keep in mind, I had to drive out of town. I thought I was going crazy. And so I would see a psychologist only to be told, no, you're not going crazy. And then I gave it time, and then I could not reconcile my new worldview with being a minister, and so I walked away. As far as the book, it just, we started a family. I started a new career, and I just simply didn't have the time. I always knew I was going to write something, but it took some time to do
that. So if Christianity were a product, or Jesus were a product, and the believer were the consumer of that product. And if the pastor is the salesman of that product, you had been a bad consumer and a bad pastor because you couldn't get the money. You couldn't preach about tithing. You couldn't compel your congregation to tithe. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I failed in that respect. I had those pressures. I did the best that I could. But, what would I say? I would say it might not be the product. It might be, the organization. And, you might want to take a hard look at yourself. But then I would also, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I would say you might want to also consider your product, and you might want to even ask, does it even exist? Are you peddling myth? Are you peddling a legend and you have no idea that you're peddling it? That's the other thing, Esther, is, if your beliefs are so fervent, you don't entertain the possibility that your product doesn't exist or that your product is the product of legend and myth. Even though I'm not sure that's the problem with the decline of Christianity, but it's a question I don't think churches ask or believers ask, which is, am I on the right path here? Is this, are all these stories true that I've been told? Was Jesus the Messiah? Is there a God? And I would challenge my congregations, Esther. I would always appeal to what Socrates said about an unexamined life not worth having. Mm-hmm. And I would say from the pulpit that an unexamined faith was not worth having. And I would challenge my congregations to think critically and skeptically. One Easter Sunday, the most widely attended Sunday of the year, the churches are packed. In a sermon, I deconstructed the resurrection of Jesus. I played the role of both the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney. And I said, I'm satisfied most of you have no idea about the problems of this story. And so today I'm going to give you both sides. I'm going to make arguments for both sides, appealing to biblical scholarship. And at the end, I'll summarize it. And I had people come up who said, I had no idea that there was another side of the story and that there are problems. And I elaborated on those problems earlier in your show. Those problems are real. And they even get larger beyond the resurrection. There's no mention of Jesus in any Roman literature, art, history, nothing, zilch, zero, nada, no mention of Jesus. And there's very little extra biblical evidence to support that there even was a Jesus. Josephus and Tacitus, who were contemporaries, well, actually, that's even debatable. In Josephus' Antiquities, Jesus occupies a footnote. So let that sink in, Esther. A footnote. Jesus occupies a footnote in Josephus' Antiquities, in which Josephus just says there was a Jesus. He was a teacher of wisdom. He allegedly performed miracles, was killed, and alleged to appear to his disciples. That's it. Tacitus makes a reference, but there's no extra biblical evidence to support that there even was a Jesus. So that calls into question, okay, if there was this Jesus, what else can we say? Is what we have about this Jesus merely the product of a myth? And I would argue it is.
Yeah. And in comparison, John the Baptist gets about 10 chapters in Antiquities of Josephus.
John said that he was lesser than Jesus, but it looks like he's more exalted in Josephus.
Right. So that's what it is. I always say this. It's not about how much has been said about Jesus. It's about how little or why nothing has been said about Jesus.
That's a great point, Esther. And, as you know from your studies of Paul writing prior to the Gospels, and that's so crucial that people understand that. Paul writing prior to the Gospels does not mention the miraculous birth, does not tell the miracle stories, and he does not talk about the empty tomb. We know nothing of Jesus' life from Paul. We get it from the Gospels that were written 25, 30 years later. That's a problem. That is a problem. And it goes to your point, the paucity of evidence beyond the Gospels, that there even was a Jesus, is very arresting, and it should pose problems for believers.
Correct. So, David, there's a chapter in your book that says the wide-eyed worship of an insecure God. And in that, you make a reference to Mormon musical, Book of Mormon musical. Okay. So there's a song that you mentioned in that. Would you want to talk about it? I mean, that's really funny. And so it's not funny in that sense, but it makes so much sense. But because of the way it has been put, it sounds funny. So would you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I got that. There's a song in the Book of Mormon, but I set the stage by looking at the typical worship service. And you could even include Judaism and Christianity. And it's simply, it's a worship service. God is praise. We love you. We praise you. We thank you. You're wonderful. You're the best. But God is never held accountable for the bad stuff. And I say, there are no WTF prayers in a religious worship service. And I talk about a song in the Book of Mormon that I think is one of the best prayers that I've ever heard. And the backdrop is 2 Mormon missionaries have been sent to Uganda to proselytize the natives. And when they arrive there, they find it's a place where 80% of the villagers have AIDS. There's hunger, there's thirst. And they observe the Ugandans singing a song that's called Hasadiga Ibawai. And the Mormon missionaries are singing and dancing along with the Ugandans. And one of the Mormon missionaries say, wait a minute, what does this song mean? What does Hasadiga Ibawai mean? And one of the villagers said, well, Ibawai means God, and Hasadiga means F you. So I guess in English, it would be F you God. And one of the missionaries recoils and says, wait a minute, things aren't that bad. Oh, really, says the Ugandan. He has AIDS, I have AIDS. And this is a song we fling our hands up to the air and say this prayer. And I argue in my book that there's more honesty in that prayer than in most of the prayers that are offered in a religious worship service, because these Ugandans were being brutally honest, and they weren't beholden to tradition or protocol. They were singing something from their hearts. And the Mormon missionaries could not relate to that because they lived a different life, privileged life. And so I simply, I cite that song as an example of what I would consider to be not only a prayer, but an honest, heartfelt prayer, much more honest than what you hear in most church services.
That makes me think of one of the most arrogant prayers that you can ever come across is that of a person sitting at a table with a full plate in front of him. And he is praying, thank you, God, for providing this food for me. Somehow, God found this person to be much more worthy of, giving a plate full than those kids that die of hunger in Africa every hour, in thousands.
We have the audacity and the arrogance and the presumption to say, God is great, God is good. Let us thank him for our food. By his hands, we all are fed. Give
Correct.
us, Lord, our daily bread. Amen. And I got to the point, even when I was a minister and I would hear that prayer, I would refuse to say it. I would not move my lips because it is such utter BS.
I told you were a bad consumer.
As you are making that prayer, someone is dying of hunger. Aren't you that special? And isn't God that great? No, that God is neither great nor good. Any God that presides over a world in which 3 million children die of hunger, and in which 100 children today, Esther, in the United States will die of cancer, that God is neither great nor good. and I would say is not much of a God.
Correct. And what makes God choose one over the other? What makes God choose an already bloated, obese person over a food deprived and hunger stricken African child? So, what makes
Yeah,
him pick and choose people that he wants to bless?
If that's the case, that God is very capricious, and that God is actually cruel, because he's bestowing his favor on someone who really doesn't need it.
Or maybe he just doesn't exist.
You think? Wow, I haven't thought about that one.
Okay. Thank you so much, David, for being on the show. And thank you for all those insights into the workings of ministries, churches, precisely the Baptist ministries, which we know that are more of corporations and less of places of worship and places where God is supposed to reside. So we know they are corporations. So thank you for sharing the insights and your journey. And to the viewers, the link, the Amazon link to the book, to David's book, is in the description below. So thank you once again. And I really hope to talk to you about Paul, a little bit about Paul. So sometime I'll bring you back on the show and we can have the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. I enjoyed being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in another episode. Until then, namaste.